Have you ever seen the kind of change that we're seeing in companies, in businesses, particularly as it pertains to employees and personalities? Let's talk about the book and kind of your background. And the book is The Art of Transformational Coaching. And there's a workshop that goes with that. And let me give you some background on coaching. From my perspective, I started my business when I was 28 years old. And one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was when I was 29 years old was to join a group, kind of like a mentors group, what they'd call a CEO group today. And all
Mm.
of the guys in it were in their 50s and I was 29, 30 years old. My business in the first 4 years went from zero to $14 million a year. And so here I was as a 32, 33-year-old and with no idea what to do. And those guys were absolutely critical to me, both as a mentor and as a coach. The chairman of the group was a previous Fortune 500 CEO, and we got time with him one-on-one every single month. And that was absolutely invaluable for me. So my background, now I'm 52, all of the guys are younger, right? All of the guys that were 50 are in their 70s and have moved on. And now I'm the one that instead of just sitting there and listening and soaking it up like I did
Yeah.
when I was younger, now I'm the one that's giving the advice and has all of the history. So something that's near and dear to my heart is coaching, mentorship, things of that nature. When we are looking at mentorship and coaching, is there a difference in your eyes?
Well, I think there is. I'm not sure I'm not sure it's a terribly meaningful one, but a mentor is usually somebody who's guiding somebody in their career in some meaningful way, whereas a coach is usually somebody who's guiding around effectiveness in some arena. And but mentors are coaches, coaches are mentors. Most of my clients I work with for many, many years. And whereas it may have started as coaching around their leadership, around helping them become more effective in some important feature of their life, it slowly transmogrifies to where they're seeking guidance in their family, in their life, in their career, and one bleeds into the other, at least for me, quite beautifully.
And this has been sounds like your life's work, based on the bio that we had. You got into this early. How is that going all the way back to your days at Harvard? From the sound of it, where'd that come from?
Well, I when I was in Harvard, I was studying to become an organization development consultant, and that's how I think about myself right now. I don't hang out my shingle as an executive coach. I hang out my shingle as an organizational development consultant, where my job is to kind of wrap my arms around a whole organization and look to lift that organization to higher and higher levels. And I've been doing it for 38 years. When I started out, there wasn't a thing called coaching. Coaching is something that's kind of grown in the past 15 or 20 years. When I started out, we were just advisors to leaders in the context of our consulting. And I
Mhm.
still am. I get hired to work with a whole organization, to work with a whole leadership team. And in the context of that, I do a fair bit of coaching. And it's primarily because the quality of the organization is very much a reflection of the consciousness of the leadership. And so if a leader wants an organization to shift or grow or transform, they got to look in the mirror. It starts with them. So I'm almost always coaching the leaders in the client organizations that I work.
In that 38 years, bringing us to modern day, how throughout those decades have you ever seen a time where change had taken place so quickly? We had an executive on from Northern Ireland, and she talked about a couple of weeks ago, and she talked about the way that the new employees or the younger generations don't want to work anything like the older generations, and sometimes the older generations in many contexts are working later in life, working longer, and so you have multiple generations, maybe on a level that we haven't ever had before, and of course the younger generations want to work so differently. I'm gonna say theoretically here, my experience is a little bit differently, but be that as it may, have you ever seen the kind of change that we're seeing in companies, in businesses, particularly as it pertains to employees and personalities?
Well, I think it's a great question. First of all, the idea that the new generation wants to do it differently than the prior, That's no different. That's been going on for
Yeah, good point.
generations.
Right, yeah.
When I was young, I wanted to, my parents' generation, I thought was all wet and missing some important things. And the baby boomer generation, in the '60s, started to shape a whole new way of thinking. And in some ways, the whole field of organizational development and change came from the roots of the '60s. And so that new generations want to do it differently. No, that's nothing news there. However, there is something different about the nature of change now. I used to say 20, 30 years ago, change is accelerating, and it's accelerating at an accelerating rate.
Mm.
And so you can, I think it maybe, depending on where you define a meaningful movement, we might say in the '50s or '60s, change was starting to happen more quickly than ever before. The advent of the computer, which means information can be processed much more quickly. The introduction of more and more digital technology into our world has created a much more rapidly changing world, technological advancement being the biggest one, and social change also going along. But so you could say that from the '60s till the past 5 or 10 years, change has been accelerating for sure,
Mm-hmm.
and it has to. Technology being the big one. However, something's emerging the past 5 or 10 years that I would say is a step change. And I wrote an article of this in LinkedIn about a year ago, right when COVID started to occur, and I coined a concept that I think is prophetic for what we're talking about. And basically, the title of the article was "COVID is not a crisis; it's an ambiguous crisis." And in a crisis, you kind of know what to do. If somebody breaks into your house with a gun, you protect your family, put them somewhere, or you hide, or if you're being attacked somewhere, you defend. If there's a fire in the building, you leave the building, et cetera, et cetera. Usually in a crisis, we act quickly and we kind of know to avoid the crisis. But what if the crisis is ambiguous and you kind of have no idea what the rules are for dealing with it, where disinformation or misinformation is all over the place, where the question of what is a fact and what is true is in question, and this is promulgated and stimulated by the media, where you see enormous arguments back and forth, each one claiming they're in touch with the truth and the other is not. In such a world, and that's the world we've lived in the past year, and especially the past 5 years, I would say, but more so in the past year, it becomes really hard to figure out how to navigate. So you could argue that we live in a world of high ambiguity. There's a term called VUCA. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
No, huh?
It's a wonderful term that captures it. VUCA stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous.
Hmm.
And it was coined by the military. I'll tell you the story if you're interested in how it got coined.
Please.
But so I'll tell you the story, and then we can relate it to change itself. So the military started to look at the theaters of operation and the nature of military combat, and noticed that always in the past, you kind of knew where your enemy was. And you could see the unfolding of their strategy through any of a number of means, and then create your own strategy to attack or defend. And starting with the Vietnam War, that started to change, where your enemy could show up from anywhere. You can go into a house or near a house, and all of a sudden the people in the family had guns, or you would take your helicopter to a certain place and you'd be gunned down, not by military, but by people who were just protecting their family. And so it became harder to find out where the enemy is. Now, when you move into the world of terrorism, it became even harder. Terrorists right in your own backyard and where at any given moment something could be bombed or attacked. And so they realized, the military, that our strategies for detecting where the enemy is and what to do and defending were no longer working. And they then said, the nature of military operations is now VUCA-like. It's volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex and ambiguous. That's the nature of the enemy. So they had to figure out different strategies to deal with such a world. And I would say the world of business, or the world of life, is much like that. That term VUCA captures the spirit of what we're experiencing. And in such a world, the rules for leading and the rules for guiding an organization and becoming effective are very different than they were 30 or 40 years ago. The term pivoting came on the landscape probably about 10 years ago. And now we all know we've got to learn how to pivot quickly, not just adapt, not just respond, but pivot, literally our strategies. That's the nature of the change that we're in, and requires a different kind of leadership.